series is just to give you an opportunity to tell your story and to add your story to a collection of narratives that showcase the diversity of Louisiana and also show how Louisiana is a place of diversity and problem solvers and not just problems to be solved. The question I start with is never one that's complicated. It's pretty simple and straightforward. And that question is, where are you from?
I'm born and raised just within a few miles of where I sit now and where I live now. So New Orleans in the 70s is when I first arrived here. And yeah, I still live in New Orleans. I've lived in other states. I've lived in other countries for a few months at a time, but New Orleans is a center for me.
I know New Orleans is a city with different layers and different textures and different vibes. And the New Orleans experience, particularly for people who grew up before Katrina, is one that is very unique and very multi-layered. So I wanted to kind of know what it was like growing up in New Orleans for you.
You know, I guess for those who pay attention to the subtleties, I would start to say that a good bit of it involved moving. So sometimes we were in, various parts of uptown New Orleans typically, but then I went to school in Metairie for part of the while. We moved to the North Shore for a little while. Actually, my parents are still there, but all the while we were very immersed in New Orleans-oriented activities. At least, the Mardi Gras will stay with you if you're passing. And that's some of my prime memories. But the general region is where I was. So I have to say sometimes it was, not necessarily, quote, specifically New Orleans, but everybody around here kind of feels, we're not from Cleveland. Even if you're from just outside of New Orleans, it's not so far from the heart of it all here. So anyhow, growing up here, I was the youngest of four. And so my older siblings were all immersed in school. We left for my father's family, other than us, was based in Connecticut at the time. So when I was about 4, we moved there for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, I think, and came back. And once we came back is when we started living on the North Shore. But I was always going to school on the South Shore. And all my friends were dispersed around the South Shore because of school. So we were kind of all over the place and in the region always. However, that side of my family, my dad's mom's family, is multi-generation New Orleanian. They just moved out to the Northeast. So through that side of the family, my daughter, who's almost 9 now, is 6th generation New Orleanian. So the New Orleans-ness is through and through, at least from some angle. And a lot of that is just having grown up here and lived here. Although we lived in many different places, this was always the in and out. Generally, like I mentioned Cleveland, no disrespect to Cleveland, I have to say I've never even been there, just a figure of speech, like Kashmir or something. Once you do leave this area, everybody who grows up here will sort of attest to that it's quite different to live here, like you said. It's quite unique, especially pre-Katrina and pre-internet. And the more and more things become sort of the same everywhere, right? So back then, there was obviously airplane travel, of driving, but we were far enough away from most other cities that touring music groups didn't necessarily come through here as much as they would other cities who are nearby other big cities. It's enough of a drive at the time. So it was relatively, what I'm getting at is the sort of provincial feel. Like we weren't so connected or concerned with things that were going on far away. We were just kind of immersed in our own way of life. And it was quite different. If you left here, everybody always references the drinking side, but that's not so much a factor when you're a kid. But the drinking things is, you can walk down the street with a beer or something like that. in New Orleans, and you can't in other places. So as you leave, you see, oh, it's pretty different, or we're different than so many places around here. So that's the beginning of the New Orleans-ness thing. But I just remember being outside a lot in costumes, and I've just seen pictures, and you know, you're a kid, parades, you know, always visiting friends and family that were in the parade, around the parade routes, and parents always doing things that I guess was just normal. But now that I look back, or when you see it from maybe the point of view of another city, you see the uniqueness of New Orleans coming through.
I have a very intimate relationship with New Orleans because, as you can see by my jumper, you know, I went to the University of New Orleans and I grew up in Baton Rouge. So I engaged with the city as in the post-Katrina New Orleans. So I remember going to New Orleans as a little kid before Katrina, but most of my understanding of the city is after the storm. That's why I always find it intriguing to talk to people who grew up in New Orleans before the storm ever hit in 2005. And then also living in other cities like, you know, Baltimore and going to New England, those different places. You know, I find that New Orleans is a very unique American city that is almost un-American in its just its energy. And in many ways, it's also a city that, even though it's very provincial, it is a very welcoming place. And for a lot of people outside of New Orleans and other parts of the world, their interaction with the city is through Mardi Gras and also through just the music scene in New Orleans. And I know that you're a musician. What impact do you feel, you know, the music culture of New Orleans played in your development as a musician?
I keep coming back to the parades, and I just, other things, like I was very musically active. I would sing leads in musical theater and be in choirs and all these things, which technically kind of could have happened anywhere. But then in the midst of all that, to go walking down the street with friends during a parade and having all these marching bands everywhere and people really loosely hanging together was, it puts us a certain, you know, character to your gait, to your stride, that you feel comfortable interacting, walking around. I guess another term is people say pedestrian, but what I mean is that it's a walking culture. I mean, the French Quarter itself, you walk, and in the region, we walk around. I mean, these days, of course, I got to go anywhere you get in a car to go. But there's still a lot of community activities where we all walk around and integrate, interrelate. And it's the laissez-faire bit is hard to underestimate, how just natural people can allow themselves to be around each other. And as a kid, being 10 years old, I might have had a shaker or something, or not, I don't know, but you can just, it's like improvisation, you know? It's the cultural creative improvisation, and the way it affects and informs my music playing is very much like that. It's like we're walking down the street together, and if there's a parade, you know, you can interact, and the music may reflect that, but maybe just for one song, you know. I was never a part of a music group that felt like we had to play the quote New Orleans stuff for our living. We were already New Orleans, whether people called us that or not. There's no denying it, but it didn't necessarily fit the sellable part, which helps people drink beer, and people from out of town drink beer, and you know, contribute to the economy and all that. So how does it affect my music playing? Maybe that's the key term, is that, you know, informs my sense of cultural creative improvisation. Maybe I'm just a social person, but my siblings would say they're similar.
You left New Orleans and you went to UCLA and you studied ethnomusicology. Is that correct?
Bingo, yeah.
So walk me through your journey of going from New Orleans to LA and then studying ethnomusicology, and then tell me what was that experience like? And also, what is ethnomusicology?
Well, it's a fun story. Of course, I got to live it, so I love telling it in a new way each time. So basically, ethnomusicology is the study of music in any particular cultural context. So you could say anthropology, cultural anthropology, if you want to go down the academic road and say it's a offshoot of that, where you choose any aspect of culture, any aspect of human life, anthropology, and you study it, and you start to see how all sorts of other aspects of the culture interrelate with the chosen subject that you chose. So you can choose food, or, gender studies, or religion, or economics, or music, and learn about all these other things through that focal point. So ethno is any group of people, basically. Ethnomusicology, so it's the study of music in its cultural context rather than just the sound by itself. That's ethnomusicology. Now, how did I get there from New Orleans? Yeah, that wasn't a well-trodden path. A little background from where I left off before was sort of middle school, coming of age, singing in plays or musicals and choirs. At a certain point, the playing guitar became a thing, and I had a little head start in my community. So all of a sudden I was performing a lot, and I had a good ear and could learn things that way. I ended up playing in a lot of creative, or one primary creative music group as a youth, and the other fellows in the group were of drinking age, and Louisiana at the time was 18. So I was 15, they were 19, and they took me around all the sorts of bars playing creative music. So by the time I reached the end of high school, I had a lot more sort of head start in that field than your average, American high school graduate, I guess you would say. How I got to LA in particular was not so related to that. It's not like I went to LA to do music. But the diversity was what attracted me. I was looking at different schools around the country, and, I didn't really feel like LA would probably be what I wanted, but I went to visit, and I could still hear the trees, birds, trees swaying, and the birds. I was like, all right, it's not just a concrete jungle out here. But the diversity was just what got me. And the school I was at had a multicultural dorm that I joined, or started there. And, there's lots of languages, lots of people represented from all over the world. There's Los Angeles, so one of the great meccas for every country is to send someone and their family to the United States. And New York and LA is usually the most common places. So there was a restaurant from every country in the world somewhere in LA if you wanted to go check it out. So that was part of the draw, and I was like, okay. And a natural sense for, again, that sort of cultural inclusivity. Maybe to backtrack for a moment, Mardi Gras, that inclusivity, some people study the things like Mardi Gras as reversal rituals. But I think New Orleans doesn't, reversal meaning like, if you're, whatever your normal state is, during the carnival, you can flip it, do the opposite, because the social elasticity at that time is just flexible in order to allow out a lot of tension and whatever. However, I think New Orleans, we have most people would probably agree, we have our defined time where that happens, but then, Lent starts, but then 2 weeks later is St. Patty's Day, and 2 weeks later there's another, and next week there's another, and it's not confined to the reversal ritual. It's much more interwoven, which I think is a hallmark of life around here in the New Orleans area, where the music and the food and everything emanates out from that. It's a great thing to be. However, back to that story, how did I get to ethnomusicology? so the college counselor at my high school suggested a few things, thought I might like this college or that college, and the one in Los Angeles had the diversity. So I went there, and within a couple of weeks, I found out there was concerts at the campus's chapel, and of the highest caliber of Indian music, actually. So there's one musician who's the most famous musician in the history of Indian music. He started this is Pandit Ravi Shankar, his name, Ravi Shankar. And he's very famous for having associated with the Beatles and brought the sitar. I have one, but not handy. It's the sibling to this instrument. He made a concert organization, a concert society in Los Angeles area called the Music Circle. And they rented the chapel at my college to put on their small concerts. The opening act for that concert, the first one I went to, was a collection of Tibetan monks blowing these huge horns, you know? So the diversity was astounding, and it captivated me. A little while into that school, a friend of mine from that school had gone to East Africa to make documentary film work about music traditions there. And he came back and encouraged me to think about doing something he had done, which was to take an independent study at my college, go to UCLA, which was across town, and request that the teacher allow you to audit a class in ethnomusicology, because they had the one and only undergraduate department of ethnomusicology in the world at the time. They started the academic discipline of ethnomusicology as a graduate program, and graduates of that went out to other universities, Wesleyan and everything, to start the expansion of ethnomusicology. Then they started the first undergraduate department. So I was at one school called Occidental College, which is actually where President Obama went for a couple of years. He went from Hawaii to this school, Occidental College, then over to New York for Columbia. I started in New Orleans, went to Occidental, same school. Then I switched to UCLA because they had the ethnomusicology. So I gradually made my way there, and that was to study music in any context. And we were looking at everything under the sun. I mean, the first year we had 3 survey courses to do Europe and the Americas in one class, 10 weeks. Then Africa and the Middle East, another 10 weeks. Then Asia and the Pacific Islands. And at that point, it's a lot of information to take in. And I found myself gravitating towards the music of India. And I'll play in a little bit. This is one of the string instruments I've learned to play. I also learned to play the drums from the tradition, tabla. And after a few months of that, I came home back to New Orleans for just a summer. And, you know, it's a small enough community. I had already been playing live locally and becoming part of the active creative music culture here. And the consensus was that no one had ever studied Indian music in New Orleans. Maybe some people had the instrument or, you know, had enough to sort of jam on it, you know. You can always treat them like bongos and just sort of play them. But to actually study the instrument in a more standard form, no one had done here. And anyone who had come through town with that knowledge usually would come and go, you know, stay a couple of days at best. There's a local Indian performing arts organization called the Indian Art Circle of New Orleans. They have maybe twice a year, they would bring a top grade classical Indian artist from India who's going on tour through America. They would sponsor bringing them through town. But those musicians would never even really notice that New Orleans was something special usually. So that's where when I came back to town after just a few months at UCLA learning tabla, it became a thing to do, to give the New Orleans musicians a chance to interact with someone who was actually dealing with the tradition, the North Indian classical music tradition, and give those musicians coming through town really what ended up, most of them end up writing it on their resume that they have some jazz experience now because of something that I sort of knocked on their door. It's like, come on out. I think you might like to hear Henry Butler or, Tim Green, or come, do you want to hear anything? Do you like any particular instrument? Maybe we can go hear it. So, I mean, those guys were touring a lot and maybe like to stay in their hotel room. But that became a social integration project for me, to give both communities a chance to appreciate the other in what to me seemed like a natural inclination towards appreciation. You just don't have the chance to make the connection. And then, for me, it became a matter of what can that blend into and, affect other things. And it was nice to hear, without my instigation, that later some of the parties I had introduced were getting together on their own terms and having private house concerts and things like that. So that was the beginning of that.
So with music, you specialize in indo-jazz, like a fusion of classical Indian music with jazz, which one is native to New Orleans, the other one is not. So I want to kind of unpack this whole indo-jazz, classical Indian music kind of thing. You talked about how in California you got into classical Indian music and the Indian music tradition, and then you came back to New Orleans and you do like this indo-jazz. I have an idea of what it is because I actually had a chance to listen to it. But for those who may be watching this interview, they probably have no idea what classical Indian music would sound like, and they have no idea what Indian fusion jazz would sound like. And could you, by chance, like maybe provide an example of what classical Indian music is and kind of how that would fit into jazz music?
Sure. And feel free to chime in along the way if I go down various rabbit holes. Starting from New Orleans again, the perspective is where and how do we encounter Indian music? Maybe we heard it, but we didn't necessarily know that was Indian music. And it may have sounded sweet. It may have sounded exotic. It may have sounded weird or cacophonous or something, So for me, that was the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, the sort of classic rock and the pop radio. I mean, back in my day, that was there was only a couple of radio stations that we would bounce back and forth between. And if you had a cassette or an LP, LPs were starting to phase out. But anyhow, your exposure to it was minimal. So as I have gone to the metaphoric mountaintop with this, coming back and telling the story about Indian music, first of all, it's 1 billion people in India. So there's a lot of variety, 20-something languages. The idea of it being a nation is even debatable. So it's a relatively recent thing, but the strands that they're all working and living with transcend the idea of nationhood. The music itself, you could say there's a very small percentage of those billion that are into the classical music. And that is literally musicians who come from families, lineages who were sponsored by the wealthy kings and some peripheral family things, and later by just wealthy patrons who loved the music. But initially it was in the courts of the Mughal Empire. We're talking 500-600 years ago. The musicians that were hired in that setting, that style is what became known as North Indian or Hindustani classical music. South Indian music has a different history. It's pretty much like it's like classical and jazz in Western music and American music. You know, you can have great musicians who do play both, but typically most musicians go in one direction or the other. Classical musicians don't like to improvise, and jazz musicians will study some classical music, but maybe they're not going to give recitals and all that stuff. However, the materials are the same. You have the same notes, you have pianos, you have the same language essentially, right? So in India, the North Indian system and the South Indian classical music systems are different enough, but of course a lot of overlap. And that's a small percentage in the billion who are connected to the classical music. But that's what spread to the West when Ravi Shankar, who was associated with the Beatles, and his brother-in-law is Ali Akbar Khan, Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, and luckily that's who I got to learn from, was the most famous person in Indian music, Indian classical music. His brother-in-law, basically his teacher's son. So it's been astounding on that level. But the point is that those guys were brought to Europe to play in the Western classical music circles. They made records, they made LPs. They were the first ones to make recordings of classical music from India, North Indian especially. And those LPs did a lot of the traveling for them. So when you're in New Orleans and you think Indian music, for most people, it's those LPs, you know, where it'll be a sitar and a tabla drum. So the tabla drum is here. It's the most common instrument to accompany all the other instruments. I should say briefly, that small percentage is what we got exposed to here in New Orleans. The rest of Indian music is super diverse, music from India. And the most common is the film music, because again, that travels a lot easier. You don't have to play it every time. You just make the machine play it. But cinema in India, especially in the poor rural places, just to get to see a movie is a big experience. And then the music from those movies, and they're all musicals, most of them are musicals, that music informs, that's what most people listen to, in addition to the oldest folk music, which is passed down in the families and stuff. So that's Indian music, but the small percentage of classical is what made it here. Since then, all the other stuff has made it here. Studying ethnomusicology in Los Angeles, we had to decipher these things. And on a test, where's this sound from? And you'd hear 5, 10 seconds, and you have to, Burma, no, Ghana. You know, like we had to learn the differences between these styles of music within one country and within the whole globe. So folk music, classical music, pop music, film music, all these things, they all interrelate. Back to New Orleans, where you would hear the classical music on record mostly, and people heard Ravi Shankar, who was a sitar player. I kind of want to show you a picture, but don't think I have that handy. A sitar. It's like the most common thing in Indian music. But this is what I play, which is a sibling to it. It's called a sarod, and it's more of a banjo version, while a sitar is a gourd. That music is essentially meditative. So it's used, when we say ethnomusicology, there's the music and the sound itself, but then there's the context where it has its meaning and its purpose and function and intent. So the intent with North Indian classical music is to pray and center your soul. We set up a very simple 4-string instrument usually, and have someone in the family, the archetypal image is that it's a student of the main musician. If it's a concert, that's the concert imagery. But you would have a swelling, simple drone, and it helps to block out all the other sounds, but it also centers the musical pitch. So on here, was hoping to have tuned it, but hoping to have tuned it before. So we choose a center point. Meh, still a little out of tune. Basically, that's it. It's a little sharp. I'm working on the tuning. And you use that, and you start with one note, and that one note never stops the whole song. And the musician's imagination is focused like laser beam on this note is everything. All the rest of it is like emanations of that note, variations of that note as it flows and undulates. So we sit and sing that one note for a long time. When we're learning, they say 1 year, just sing one note. Right? So it's a meditation, right? And it helps center you. Eventually you sing all these other notes and everything. And then eventually you apply that to an instrument. Then the drums bring in a whole other kind of dimension, but they also have that note, and they also sing that note the whole song. So we can call that a drone. So in New Orleans music, basically whatever the melodies that we sing follow patterns where you put together many notes as a chord. It's hard to play on this instrument. That's an example of like 2 chords. One and then the other. And it's a collection of notes moving around, and the melody in Western music has to follow the shapes and contours of that chords, the accompanying sounds played by other instruments that the melody sits on top of. In Indian music, there's only the melody. They never change chords. And the drums reinforce that, but they bring in different structures based on rhythms, and the melodies go with those structures. And so if you're in New Orleans and you've been exposed to Indian music only on the basic beginning level, it's probably because you heard a record, an LP, like most likely, or cassette. It could be a pop band or Western band that's influenced by that, or it could be, an actual Indian music CD or album. So groups like the Byrds were a pop group in the 60s, singing 8 Miles High, and Crosby, Stills and Nash, some of the guys from that are in it. John Coltrane was starting to take lessons actually with Ravi Shankar, this great Indian sitar player. So Westerners were starting to write music that was inspired by the meditative aspect of Indian music. Getting the musical specifics, that was less important. It was just trying to get the vibe of focus and meditation, and it became associated with psychedelics, which is a whole other sub-story. But essentially the music has nothing to do with that. It was once said, like, please give the music a chance to take you wherever you think some other drug might take you, or a smoke or a drink. So my teacher actually was famous for stopping a concert once because the person who had organized it was sipping on alcohol during the concert. He stopped the concert. So that's where this is really coming from. Mix that with American music, New Orleans music, Western music. Eh. It got associated with psychedelics because of the focus potential and really staying connected and going on a journey. It's up to the musician's imagination, therefore, once you get deep into trying to do something with this. The imagination of the musician determines whether you're going to make the piece be 5 minutes long or 2 hours long, a single piece of music. So John Coltrane would play the 45-minute matinee where it was one piece the whole time. That had never been done. This is Western music being influenced by Indian music. And of course, every mention of the word jazz brings you back to New Orleans in some sense. But John Coltrane and all the maestros of that era going towards Indian music was not necessarily connected to New Orleans all that much, although they know the connection was integral in their being, the way they play, having roots in New Orleans musical styles that preceded them. Anyhow, that's another massive side subject. So the musicians here in New Orleans, when I got to start interacting with them, to bring this instrument and this instrument primarily, when I first started in New Orleans playing this music, I was playing the drums more than anything. But there was a local musician named Priyo Majumdar who played this instrument. And he and I did 200 or 300 concerts together. And probably half of them were integration concerts with New Orleans musicians. He doesn't live here anymore, and I'd started to develop a feel for this instrument. So after 10 years of only playing that while he played this, I started to play this. One of the things is that it's a soloistic tradition, and that you don't really play in an ensemble. Kind of, but not much. You essentially are, all the music is coming out of a single person's efforts. To do your practice, it's a personal practice, prayerful practice, meditative practice. And then if you're going to play a concert or you're going to work on some things that involves another musician, okay, you do that. And so that's the common setting, is just 2 musicians. It's one drummer and one melody player, and that's it. To play in an ensemble was a new thing for the Indian musicians here. Now, Priyo Majumdar, who played, he was kind of the only guy in the region who could do it. A few other people did some, and then as other musicians who are on a sort of international caliber, as they would come through New Orleans to play a single concert or 2 and move on, I started to have success in encouraging them to interact with local musicians. So that's part of it too. And there's some really nice audio and video from all that, hoping to compile.
I know that you do a lot to promote this genre and this type of music in the community in New Orleans. And New Orleans is a city that holds a lot of genres together, but the core of it is jazz. And jazz has been used as a way to not only promote culture in New Orleans, but to also promote humanitarianism as well. And from what I've read about you, you've done some work in terms of using music as an extension of sharing culture. So what are some ways that you've been able to kind of share culture through this music tradition of classical Indian music and indo-jazz?
One of the first things when people physically come into proximity with Indian music is we leave our shoes at the door. So right away, it's a different experience for people who have maybe from here, who aren't exposed to it. So right away, people are more, I guess, percentage-wise, you probably have your shoes on more often in Louisiana when you listen to live music. So once you take them off, it's like, oh, it's almost like you're at home. You might be in somebody else's home, but it's a more intimate setting. It's comfortable, you know, those sort of things. I think it's usually welcome. Now, certain people are really fish out of water to not have their shoes on inside somewhere other than their own house. But that's one thing. There's all sorts of specific cultural things that can be like that. Like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, I'm curious. Or, oh, wait, that makes me feel a little bit weird, right? It's a normal thing with culture. We have things about the instruments where we don't step over them. We actually, when we leave our shoes at the door, it's a sign that the bottom of our feet is the part of the body that's most likely to have picked up something you don't know about. We can leave our shoes at the door because who knows what you stepped on that you didn't know. And it's easier to clean the house if everybody doesn't have their shoes on walking everywhere. So the feet, it goes further with the feet. Like we don't point our feet at things that we respect for the same, similar kind of general reason. So we sit on the floor to have the concert. We don't sit in chairs. We don't sit on the floor. And often there's a rug, you know, or a carpet. You know, these are some of the more specific Indian things. If we're walking to a place, we always want to leave a walking path because it's disrespectful to step over someone or to step over even an instrument or even a book. If there's a book that is teaching you things, why would you want to point the bottom of your feet towards it? That kind of like thing. It's so ingrained that in the mindset of people from India that in America it's different. So those kind of things come up at a concert. Like somebody says, "Oh yeah, regale me," you know, and they lean back and point their feet at you when you're about to play a concert. And the Indian musicians, especially, are like, I'm not in the mood to play now. No, you know. So there's all sorts of navigation of subtle things that, you know, you want to let it just naturally happen, but you can be a bridge builder, a facilitator. So playing the music, dealing with the music is its own world. But then being a facilitator for other people to play and enjoy the music. You see me in a lot of the pictures of these years where I'm sitting in the middle of playing these drums, and there's one musician from one culture on that side and another musician from the other culture on that side, and we play. And the standard format that I would present to everybody was like a debate, almost like a spontaneous dialogue to hopefully bring out fresh stuff that's sort of maybe not as prepared, but more spontaneous. So I would actually lay out and not, I would maybe introduce everyone and then I would not play for a good chunk of time, like sometimes 30, 40 minutes, and just give them the floor to, you know, and we had a format where it was, I mean, that how long it took is, again, up to the imagination of the musicians. But one would speak, the other would speak. The other would speak, the other would speak. Okay, now let's go to phase 2, where the tempo is a little bit hotter. One speak, one speak, one speak, and then spontaneously things would happen together. Okay, phase 3, top speed. You. Okay, and something happened together, boom, boom. Okay, that was part of our normal format, was like a 3-tiered debate. Then the drums come in, and we do it again, but now with drums. Because the drums give a certain form rather than just texture. Like the drums are known for measuring, keeping measurements together in Indian music. So we'll measure, it's like a 16-beat pattern, and we just keep that. Or they play with the math a lot. We can say, all right, there's a 10-beat structure. I'm going to play these 10 beats. Actually, I have this new one. It's an 11 3/4. It sets its own form and shape, and then the melodies go all around it. So when it's just Indian music, there's one melody that does that. With Western music, there's so many layers of different forms. So we would, rather than try to school each other on like structures, I presented this format, and it led to good stuff. In the Indian culture, the food after the concert, we all get along. Hey, we have a nice time. Traditional way is to eat with the hands. You grab some food like a hot dog, right? And use your hands, right? Well, then grab some rice, grab some of this, and it's a really clean and traditional way to do it, honestly. And everybody there says it tastes better. But, you know, these are some of the fun cultural things that just come along with it. In the New Orleans musical world, it's pretty cool in New Orleans generally, especially with the musicians clinic and stuff. But, you know, in some parts of the world, school teachers are revered as, oh, that's a great position in the society. Very honored, like a doctor or something. In some places, teachers are revered like that. And in some places, they're not. Like in New Orleans, you know, we really don't treat the teachers that well. We could, right? So same thing with music. Like in some places, like in North India, music is actually, it's a more defined and valued need in society. We need to have this. And, you know, whether this standard metrics of value that are oriented around economics, usually around here, it's different for that. The value of having musicians is irreplaceably valuable and sustains culture on a level where, you know, it's the nonverbal sustenance. Like it's things you can't put into words, but we need it. And the depth of precision is remarkable and brings about, you know, it's an abstract understanding of how to order the world. And that's where the ethnomusicology comes in, is we have all these terms for studying the real religious music and the profane, you know, the sacred and the profane. But all of it is abstract representation of value systems, yeah. So the musicians in India are quite respected, even though they're still economically relatively kind of overlooked. I'm saying that as a backdrop to New Orleans. Like some of the highest level musicians, the craft and discipline and the research and the refinement that goes into making them be able to, I mean, just even play the simple, like get the parade started music. But what does it do for the people, you know? And in New Orleans, I've felt like it's definitely, like I said, with the musicians clinic, it's definitely not bottom of the ladder around here. But around the rest of America, musicians are, unless they're Prince or, you know, some mega million seller, it's kind of looked down upon, like it's just entertainment or frivolousness or something. So culturally, I was trying to find ways for the local musicians to receive the respect due from their decades-long craft and what it contributes to society. And since Katrina, and with the pandemic also, but especially Katrina, man, it became so apparent how essential the musicians are. And I'm, you know, I don't think I'm doing this to set myself up to be respected personally. I think I'm doing this for my elders first, which luckily I was able to get all sorts of top grade New Orleans musicians who were super eager to try something with this Indian music tradition. And, you know, 25 years of success in that, various successes. And the local Indian music loving and appreciating society of Indians primarily, adopted and welcomed and adored and gave all sorts of medical treatment to some of the elders here in need. And it was a real successful bridge building enterprise for me on that level as terms of problem solving. I mean, there is one case of someone who's already passed away by now, but he was regularly going to see an Indian cardiologist who had met him through my concerts, and the medical care went way beyond the standard patient scenario. So that's one side, and the flip side for me was giving these Indian music loving people in the area, in the region, and a way to feel more grounded where they actually are, and they actually are here in New Orleans. And engaging in live music is one of the more grounding experiences, I think, for people who are inclined towards music anyway. Check out the local thing, and that happened again profoundly from my perception, to see so many of those people end up going down to Vaughn's on a Thursday night, the same cardiologist as I'm thinking of, and they have friends come to town and they bring them to places that I had shown them here in town. And it made them feel more in love with where they are, So that was some of the bridge building and cultural stuff.
The reason why I asked the last question was because music is an extension of culture. So every culture has a music tradition, subculture, ethnic culture, national culture. There's always a music connected to it. And when it comes to a place like Louisiana, Louisiana is kind of seen as a place that has, very distinct musical traditions that come out of the state. So you have the blues, you have jazz, you have zydeco, you have Cajun, swamp pop even. But then you also have this diversity that is separate from the music that is not always fully acknowledged. So of course, when we talk about Louisiana's history, we talk about, the French, the Spanish, the African, enslaved people, the indigenous folks, the Caribbean folks who came and created this culture. But based on your storytelling about your experiences with music as a musician in New Orleans, there seems to be a lot more diversity bubbling in the surface beyond what Louisiana is often seen as in terms of its demographic makeup. In other words, Louisiana is a lot more diverse than we give it credit for, but it's still not seen as a diverse place. I mean, you even said that you had to go to California to experience diversity, but I'm also thinking about the fact that there is an obvious generational difference. I experienced a lot more diversity in Louisiana than probably my mom's generation did or my grandmother's generation did. But even then, with this growing diversity, there isn't a sense of acknowledgement that Louisiana is, or at least can be, a very multicultural, diverse place, despite the fact that so many people have built a presence and a home here from all of the inhabited continents in this world. Why do you think that Louisiana may be, despite of its history and its current landscape, not seen as a place of diversity, despite the fact that I guess both of our experiences show that it is a diverse place? It is a place where there are cultures here that kind of live and exist and build something in this state.
New Orleans has always been cosmopolitan. It's the base of the river and the gateway to the whole Caribbean into the North American continent. Yet, what was it, 1803? It got bought by the United States of America and has slowly become more like the rest of North America. And maybe the prisms we see through are through the lens from the United States point of view, which is that we're all, the same. Or of course we're all different, but they're trying to emphasize the unity aspect. So the unity is not so much about that. I mean, I guess all, cities on the outside of the geographic bounds of this country. So California, New York, Miami, New Orleans, LA, the diversity is just organically out of control, like in a good way. I mean, the diversity is there and it's all over the place, and it is here. But why is it less emphasized? I don't know. Jazz became what it was because of that cosmopolitanness, lots of different diverse cultures finding a way to play music together. I mean, I know it was in lots of different pockets, but the Caribbean style with the classical, New Orleans was the center of opera in the 1800s, in America anyway. New York and New Orleans. The classical music tradition here is intense, but so is the Caribbean and so is the African. And I think that's probably, one of the things that made us so unique and not like the rest of America is that the Caribbean cultures here, and African descendants in particular, were given more freedom under more of a Catholic ideology rather than the Protestant. You see it all throughout Latin America. The Catholic areas integrated African traditions more than separated and isolated them. Back to my initial answer to your question, I don't have much to say about that specific part of the question. I just don't know why. But the diversity there, it's a different kind of diversity, right? We have like Vietnamese and Hondurans, like mega communities. And then other than that, it's growing. The Indians, substantial, but they don't really draw their attention to themselves.
I think that as a Baton Rouge native and resident, my perspective may be a little different than you being in New Orleans, because New Orleans is more diverse, and you encounter more people from diverse backgrounds more often than the average Baton Rougean, who, oftentimes, whether you're rich or poor, you're going to live in a very segregated space. Unless you go to school or you're in college, then most of the existence of the average Baton Rougean is very much segregated in terms of, you're mostly around people that look like you, think like you, or have the same cultural background as you, or same interests as you. Whereas in New Orleans, there's so many more opportunities, I assume, to be engaged with people who don't look like you, because you have tourists, you have these festivals, you have football games, you have parties, and you have different festivities and cultural happenings in New Orleans, to where you may grow up in a rich part of town or a poor part of town. You may be in Ninth Ward, maybe in Bywater, maybe Uptown, maybe Mid-City, maybe Gentilly. But if there's a festival, everybody's at that festival. So you're all in the same space, on the same playing field, interacting with each other directly and indirectly. And in Baton Rouge, we just don't have that. So I think that when most people perceive Louisiana, they often perceive it based on where they're positioned geographically in the state. So in Baton Rouge, it's very segregated. The conversation of that Louisiana's diversity isn't as pervasive, whereas in New Orleans, maybe even in Lafayette, people see it often. So they're like, of course, yeah, it's diverse. We see people all the time that are different.
The peripheries, those big cities on the periphery of the country, is at play there too, where New Orleans is the last port before on the Mississippi before it goes out, and it's the first one if you're coming north, right? But Baton Rouge it's next, but it's maybe it's considerably different. Yeah, I understand. There's not so much people getting off and after a long journey there. They tend to do that in New Orleans. We've had to integrate that, but I see, yeah.
Yeah, and then another thing that I wanted to add is that for someone like me who kind of grew up in this 2000s, I was 10 when Hurricane Katrina hit, and I was in Baton Rouge. So a lot of my coming of age in Louisiana has been when it has changed demographically, at least in Baton Rouge, where you have more outsiders, quote unquote, coming into the community, and more former outsiders becoming insiders, because you have more people kind of coming in, whether it's for school or for jobs or because of the proximity to New Orleans. They're like, well, Baton Rouge is the next step for New Orleans, so settling here is natural. But for many people who come from older generations, they don't really see that. And so I think that there's a disconnect between that younger generation who grew up with people of different backgrounds and ethnicities versus people who may have kind of grown up in a very racially segregated space where, you know, you have Black people who are mostly around Black people, white people that are mostly around white people. And of course, younger generations have that experience too, but I was going to school with people who didn't look like me for most of my schooling. And then going to UNO, it was very much the case where I was always around people from a different country or a different racial background or just a different perspective all the time. And that's not a common experience. That's a privilege to be able to have that experience, to be, you know, constantly expanding your world and, or as the slogan for 821, expanding your roots. So yeah, that's why I asked the question.
I see my story fitting in, you know, again, quite privileged, like you said, to have had all that diversity. It's true, but still searching, seeing the connections of how it's part of the humanitarian problem solving is still there too. I'm trying to reach it down to simple things. And I mean, one thing I've done is played these instruments at a lot of schools. I don't think I've done that in Baton Rouge. I've taught in Baton Rouge at someone's home that a lot of people come to the same home, but playing these instruments for kids at school who clearly are not going to have an opportunity to get exposed to this. Like the other day, well, not the other day, one of the more recent ones, we went way down in Plaquemines Parish, which is a good hour's drive south of here. And man, to introduce them to Indian music was, I mean, it's like a blank slate. They really just never heard of it before, you know? So it's cool. But, you know, just trying to do my part to shed on the music, but make it you know, build bridges in communities, because the diversity, togetherness is precious and priceless, but integrating is the thing we all have to look forward to.
Well, I have a couple of final questions to ask. The first question is connected to the future. I mean, we are at the time of this interview dealing with the pandemic, so it is kind of dubious to think about the future, considering that, you know, everything changes every day. But I do want to know, you know, what are some things that you like to do in the future with your art and with your music and with kind of using music as this vessel of sharing a different culture? Because, you know, there are so many opportunities to, you know, even if you vocalize it, there are some things that you haven't done, like teaching in Baton Rouge. I mean, it's only an hour and a couple of minutes up the road. So it's like, you know, that's an opportunity there. But what are some other opportunities that you have that you'd like to pursue in terms of, you know, music or your career as a musician, or just educating people about this culture that is connected to this music that you're so deeply, you know, passionate and invested in?
My first thought is really, it is in the education, in the teaching and education, and the giving people an opportunity to chew on it a little while, rather than here's a presentation, now go home and forget about it. Or, you know, hopefully it lasts, the memory of the music, hopefully it lasts a couple of days. That's where I see, you know, this pandemic age we're in now, it's so computer oriented. And there's certainly been a lot of teaching, good teaching going on because of this, you know, video conferencing and stuff. But what I see as a sort of a preferred future is where people don't have they spend time learning, dealing with this music, chewing on it in a more meditative way. So maybe not so much on the screen, but you can do it on the screen to get sparked, but then you got to turn it off and go work on the material. And that's what I feel. So as far as education, giving maybe I think of a student in Baton Rouge, for example. If some program I'm working with brings us to the school and we can play one time, okay. But can we set up follow-ups, and can we have a small community start to blossom where there's people practicing this stuff? It's almost like martial arts or something. It's like, okay, this karate master comes through, wah, okay, wah, and everybody goes home, wah. But then if somebody pledges to study long enough to be able to teach in that neighborhood and stay, be the local person in that neighborhood, so that 5 or 7 other kids over the next few years can also have routine practice once a week, and during the week in between, they practice, they go out by themselves or little communities. And then you have communities of practitioners. And, this particular style is very particular. But all of us who study it do see it. It really is applicable to all sorts of other situations. So the meditative aspect can be where you block out other stuff. It can also, I think maybe that's one of the strengths of Indian music here in my world. But on the jazz side, that focus is not really about blocking out the world, but integrating it. So if a boat or a train goes by and blows its horn, in the jazz world, we're going to integrate that sound into the music. And in the Indian music world, we're going to kind of block it out and just stay focused, right, on our thing that we're developing. So I think, personally, it's both. But this study of music like this is very similar to the study of music in jazz when you go really deep. And they cross-pollinate in a way that it's applicable to life. It's not separate. That's a sort of intersection of these traditions that I've seen is to bring about the meditative focus, but then to engage with life as it happens rather than to stay in a monastery or something like that, or stay in a cave. Some people just call it engaged meditation. With sound, engaged sound meditation. So sometimes I've called it like the adoration of sound as a practice, because you center in on something, and if you are attracted to it, you love it, you adore it, it blossoms, and it brings you to new perspectives and outreach. And other people are doing that, and that's a healthy approach from my point of view. So I'd like to see that with education as it grows. There's enough on YouTube for everybody to watch concerts. I want to see live music, and have people experience it. So we have to develop new ways to keep the social distancing in these coming years as well, but still giving proximity concerts of relative intimacy, but not too many people. I think that's going to be good for subtle music, which this music is a lot of times a practice of subtle art, subtle sound craft. Outdoor music, that's jazz's history. It started as outdoor music. So it's an interesting intersection, I'm still working on it. The pandemic's kind of challenging to play intimate music designed for intimate settings into a place where we don't want to be too close as a collective. It's weird.
So at the end of every interview, I usually ask people if there are any more thoughts that they'd like to share or that they haven't had a chance to share yet. But we've shared so much in this interview. And I feel that perhaps instead of sharing a thought, since I did kind of accidentally cut your musical selection short earlier in the conversation, would you be interested in maybe to kind of close things out, play the other instrument that you didn't get a chance to play, or
that one?
Pick whichever one.
Okay. Yeah, I have something on here to play real quick.
Okay, let's hear it.
Maybe I'll switch to the other one. Let's see. All right, that'll be close enough for now. Just the beginning of a morning piece of music there, huh?
That's very beautiful.
Did you recognize it?
I did not, but I don't. Well, what was it? What was it supposed to be?
Well, I felt like referencing the whole Beatles tradition, because that's, oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. Oh, I'm gonna try a little help from my friends. Could it be anybody? I just need someone to love. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friend. Anyway, that's what I was imagining when I started playing that. Definitely, it's quite different. The thing is it's very related musically, and you may not recognize it. It could be just your next door neighbor wearing a mask.
Well, for me, music is music, so I appreciate a lot of genres of music, even if I don't necessarily listen to certain genres more often than the others. I still appreciate music. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed that tune. And what's the name of that instrument?
That's called sarod.
Oh, sarod. Okay.
Sarod.
And you're gonna close out with the drums?
Yeah, just a touch of it,
What is it? What is the name of that instrument?
Tabla.
Tabla. So tabla is also French for table in French. So it's like two different languages at the same time. This is funny.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap, in the old linguistics. There's Sanskrit-based languages have some overlap with Indo-European languages, French, German, Spanish. There's some there anyway. So this is tabla, and we have two drums, bass and treble. The bass has only really two notes. We say g or ge and k, which is closed. But then we can walk all sorts of notes. So the bass drum has like a whole melody there. And we have open sounds and closed sounds. And each stroke has a name. So ge, ke, tun, tete, kat, ta, gena, genana. So everything we say, we can play. Ge nagatun, nagatete kata kita taka. So da, Da din din na da din din da da din din na da. So that's little things. This I could go on and on, but I'm not going to. I'll go on and on, but there's do you need? Oh, that's a different tune. And you can play all sorts of things like that. Tin, na, tune, and combination strokes. Tere kite, yege nana. And same time strokes. Da, din. Things like that. So we put together poems. Da da tit, da da ga tune. Ta ta ka tit, da da ga din. Whoop. Dati dage dina, dati dage tina kena. Dati dage tina, dati dage dina again. And it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. Tabla is an endless little fractal music. So
That is pretty darn cool, in my opinion. This is really awesome. I've had a lot of interviews that have been very standard kind of conversations. This is the first one that I've done that has a little bit of music too. So I think this is cool.
Good. Well, I was trying to be prepared and give you something that would be. It's such special stuff. I've got to bring it out a little bit, you know.
Well, I'm so glad that you did, because I think that, you know, that is a great way of showing just what exactly is required to create this classical Indian music sound. And I think that for a lot of people who may be watching this, this is a cultural lesson and a music lesson. You know, these are instruments that people now know exist. So if they hear it on the radio, well, not radio, but they hear it, you know, being played, you know, on their Spotify or Tidal or Apple Music, or if they're just listening to Indian music when they go out to eat or go out, you know, to different events, they'll know what the instruments are.
Yeah. These guys are in commercials, a lot of commercials, the tabla. A lot of car commercials.
Oh, really?
Sometimes it's a sample, but you know, like a keyboard plays it, but sometimes it's the real deal.
I definitely enjoyed this interview, and I am sitting, it's kind of breezy today, easy, breezy, not so beautiful. Right. So, you know, it's kind of chilly up here, but I also am very thankful to have been able to do this interview with you and to have learned a little bit more about classical Indian music. I will definitely look some up, but before I go and before I end this interview, I will be derelict in my duty as an interviewer and as a bridge builder myself if I did not ask you how people can listen to your music if you are a recording artist, or where can they watch you perform this music, not on a Zoom call, but maybe in front of a live audience or in a concert. Like where can we go to listen to and watch more of you perform?
I do have a little YouTube page, and I've put some stuff up there. Then there's maybe a concert opportunity here or there I'll mention, and we'll see about a third thing. But the YouTube address, if you're looking for it, it's under my name, but it spells my name with a U, so that drum is in the middle. Of course, most of you listening may not know my name, but it's Andru for Andrew, and next word is all one word, but McLean is MCLEAN. So you have ANDRUM, so Andrum Clean, or Andrew McLean. That's the Yahoo thing. Some of the history of these concerts I've done, there's little clips on that page, and I'm sure there's playlists where you can find the names of some of my teachers I recommended. Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Saab, number one. Ustad Zakir Hussain first tabla teacher, and Sopwan Chaudhry. Then Henry Butler, Tim Green. These are some of the maestros who I'd recommend that are part of this immediate interview, but hear them play in their natural context. And then luckily I got to bring some of them together, try some stuff. One little thing, you know, I said it's up to the imagination how far you go with one piece. One of the concerts we did with Henry Butler, the first piece was 73 minutes long. So they got into it. Yeah.
Just one song.
One piece. One piece. I mean, technically there was all these movements, yeah. The slow, the medium, the fast, without the drums, and then the drums came in. And once the drums came in, we did a medium speed theme and then a faster speed theme, but it was all linked as one idea, variations on one idea. So yeah, there's clips of that on my page there. As far as live concerts, there's a concert series in Covington, which is neither Baton Rouge nor New Orleans, but somewhat in between towards the north, called the Sunset at the Landing. And I should probably play there in the fall, in the spring sometime. It's an outdoor free concert by a riverside. There's talks of that. Otherwise, no, I don't have any performances on the books these days. I guess we just keep fingers crossed. And
one of the tragic downsides of the pandemic, it's basically zapped all the musical gigs for everybody, whether it's in a small cafe or if it's in a big stadium. You know, every performing is just strictly digital.
Yeah, you know, it's made me try to put together some videos of some of the history of all this and put it up for some people to have yet another thing to watch. There's so much TV watching these days. But you know, hopefully it'll be relevant, especially relevant for some people who will get to find it amidst all the content up there these days. But for me, the practice has always been to make it in the moment for people, where their reactions will affect how we improvise the music. That's the nature of improvised music, is it's customized to the moments, and so people responding and interacting makes it a life form of its own, like a living, breathing thing. That's what we're trying to sustain, despite not being able to play live. But I'm glad that it goes beyond the music, and thanks for asking questions that go beyond the music, Johnny. It's not just about, you know, music is part of this scenario, bigger picture.
Well, that's my job. My job, interviewing, doing my work, is to dig deeper, look deeper, and bring that out to the surface. But I appreciate you for taking the opportunity to talk with me and speak with me. It's nice to meet you as well. And also, it's very much an opportunity that I think, I hope that people watching this will take advantage of, of listening to music that is outside of their cultural background, but also supporting local musicians, because, you know, at this time, a lot of local musicians are really struggling to pay the bills because of this pandemic, because there's no live gigs to make money off of, no performances, you know. So wherever we can, supporting local talent here in where I live in Baton Rouge, where you are in New Orleans, and just in Louisiana in general. So again, Andrew, thank you so much for being a part of this entire narrative in this series, and hopefully this is a great opportunity for you to share your story and to share this musical tradition to people who may have never